Well, this is weird.
No-life nerd who's never gotten pussy before in his entire life.
I'm not used to this camera angle. I feel like I'm Quentin Reviews. What's going on, internet? It's Quentin Reviews back for another episode of harassing female YouTubers in their DMs on Twitter. I was not mentally prepared to make this video. Why? Well, for context, the Fraggle Rock reboot came out 2 weeks ago now, January 21st, and I didn't find out about it until the beginning of January, so I was not mentally prepared to go into it. I was honestly hesitant to go into the reboot. Not that there aren't other reboots out there that I don't like, but I waited like 2 days after it came out to actually watch it because I didn't want to sign up for Apple TV just for the show, and two, I was legitimately worried. But then I saw other people talking about it, and I wasn't as worried. The previews definitely didn't satiate my worries. I mean, I honestly didn't like way back in like, what was it, maybe 2015, 2016, when John Tartaglia first started voicing Gobo for like little in-between segments on, what was the network that aired My Little Pony on? The Discovery Kids Network? Was it called The Hub? In hindsight, that's a very bad name now. But I never really liked John Tartaglia voicing Gobo back then. It just did not sound the same. But as most things go that are different in reboots, it did grow on me. Overall, I liked it. It was really good. I don't really think Fraggle Rock needs a serialized, overarching plot throughout the episodes, but it works with what they did. Yeah, sure, there were episodes in the original where there were maybe two-parters, or obviously having characters carry over from one to the next, but up until the last few episodes, there weren't a lot of continuous back-to-back things going on episode to episode. There's not a lot to say about it really that hasn't already been said about the original in terms of how good it is and the production value, because honestly it feels just like a continuation of the original show, except for a few things, and those are the things that I have a big issue with. One, yeah, obviously Doc had to be replaced because the original actor had passed on, but Doc just feels kind of pointless here. Like, her actor's fine. I'm glad to see Sprocket again, but there's no, as weird as it sounds, there's not a lot of chemistry between Doc and Sprocket, which was like the big thing for them. Doc was this crotchety old cranky man, but he still loved his dog. And now you just have some young grad student and her dog. Like, that's it. Like, all the stuff that we see in the little cutaways with Doc and Sprocket throughout the series eventually build up to help with the final episode. But, again, the serialization doesn't really need to be there. The actions of Doc and Sprocket usually didn't have a lot of consequences on The Rock in the original show. Usually what Doc and Sprocket's segments were for was to have the human experience of learning the same or a similar lesson that the Fraggles did during the episode. One of the biggest issues with it, aside from one thing, which we'll get to in a minute, is the pilot, the first episode, because it does that reboot thing of trying to reintroduce the concept of the show to new viewers, which honestly they could have just completely refilmed the first episode of the original series, or, you know, rewritten a little bit of it, and it would have been fine. As it stands here, though, you're not really clear whether it's a reboot or a continuation. A reboot, as the word implies, obviously resets the setting. It gets things going fresh and new, whereas the continuation just, you know, continues on from the established lore already. And everything other than the first episode just feels like a continuation. It just feels like more episodes of Fraggle Rock. But the first episode is a complete reboot. In the original series, originally, the only person that knows that Uncle Traveling Matt is going to outer space is Gobo. And after Gobo tells his friends, they don't believe him at first, which is understandable. But in the first episode of the reboot, The Rock is throwing this huge party for Uncle Traveling Matt going to outer space. It just doesn't feel right to have him leaving be this grandiose thing. It was something secret that he discovered that he only shared with his nephew, and once he was gone, then Gobo told the other Fraggles, and some of them didn't even believe him. Red always thought he was full of shit for the most part, even when he read postcards from Traveling Matt. In Back to the Rock, she flip-flops between, being excited for Uncle Traveling Matt and not believing the stuff that he's writing about in his postcards, which there is a good addition in the fact that Traveling Matt sends back artifacts from his travels in outer space, be it like a plastic water bottle or a lunch tray, just little things that connect to where he's been in the postcard. And they usually come into play at some point in the episode too, which I think does work pretty well. Another weird continuity thing with the pilot is stuff like a lot of the doozers that are working. I hate to keep saying it, but in the original series, Connor Penn wasn't yet an actual construction doozer. She was still in training. Yet in Back to the Rock, she is in a higher position. She's still an underling under the architect, but she has a lot more authority already. She's a lot more experienced and doesn't have that I need to figure out something new and untraditional to do for the doozers in order to express myself while still contributing to the culture. A lot of the issues with the pilot boil down to little character flaws like this. And the biggest character flaw... God. The biggest character flaw is Moki. This isn't Moki. It's not. There's barely any resemblance between this version and the original other than the name and color palette. Moki was the mom friend of the five. She was protective and caring. Yeah, she could be a little absent-minded or get wrapped up in things, but she was usually always the semi-dependable one, the one that knew to be calm and collected and try to, think out things. The new Moki is Red 2.0. She has a lot of the same characteristics as Red, and that artistic side that she did have in the original is cranked up to 85, and she's become this now hippie, peace and love centered Fraggle, which if you think about it, that characterization would have fit her more in the original series based on the time that it came out, but her design changed too. I really don't like the pulled back hair. If you think about it, there's not a lot of Fraggles, if any, that have full-on ponytails. Red has pigtails, but you don't see all her hair pulled back, because then you get this weird seam on the top of the puppet's head. Going throughout the entire show, something about her kept feeling off other than her characterization. It wasn't until I finished it that I realized that Moki was the same size as the other four. The original is taller because she's at least a little bit older than the rest of them, but with that comes one of the most important traits of her puppet, is the puppeted arms. Very few times did she ever have rod puppeted hands. Instead, like the older, taller Fraggles like Large Marvin, she had puppeted hands that would allow her to express herself more, which were covered by her cloak. In this, she's just another short, rod-handed Muppet. There's nothing about her body shape and design that really makes her stand out from the rest of the four. She could honestly be a background Fraggle, A lot of the worst episodes in Back to the Rock are centered around the mishaps that she creates, like not considering how others are feeling and trying to push her desires of what she wants them to do onto them rather than thinking about what they want to do. Moki would never do that. Yeah, she might slip up once or twice, but they wouldn't have a full episode centered around it. The rest of the 5 feel completely fine. All of them seem to be in character, and it's nice to hear returning voice actors and the new ones. Even John Tartaglia, honestly, do a really good job. I had a hard time a lot of the time discerning the difference between them and the original. I think part of what I didn't like about the original replacement for Gobo was he didn't have that. Gobo has like a little bit of a Canadian twang to him. And this is definitely much more present here than it was in like old TV spots. Another one of the replacement voices that I don't like though is the Trashy. It just sounds like Red's voice actress doing a different voice, which it's not even the same actress. It's a completely different puppeteer. Again, it's one of those things where you have to replace actors, but you could have at least tried to get a similar voice like you did with the rest. One of the things that made the Trash Heap so distinct was her weird, not Yiddish, not Russian, not German accent. It was kind of a weird blend of everything together, and that's what made her stand out characteristically. Here, there's a little bit of accentuation every now and then, but honestly, not a lot of the time, and it doesn't really stand out that much. The last few characters that have, I wouldn't say issues, but are lacking are Junior and Pa Gorg. For one, Ma barely gets any screen time. Junior only shows up every now and then, versus, again, the original series, where sometimes he would get almost full episodes surrounding him. Junior isn't just a side character, he's one of the main characters. And that's what made it so interesting, was to see, you know, these two sides that don't like each other sometimes having to compromise and work together or learn to understand one another. Because Junior is young and he's learning about the world. He's learning from firsthand experience versus what his parents are telling him. And Pa Gorg is just a straight up asshole here. Like, yeah, he could be, you know, the stereotypical kind of sitcom dad of like, he's kind of aloof and a little bit, you know, clumsy at times, and he can be mean to his kids, but deep down he still has like a good heart. You never see that here. Most of, if not all of Pa's lines of dialogue in this are him yelling at Junior, telling him that he's doing something wrong. Altogether, what makes my feelings wishy-washy for the reboot is the intention behind it. It sounds weird, but you feel at points that it was obviously made by people that watch the original series, that are fans of the original series. Then you get those weird mischaracterizations of the characters, which makes you feel like they didn't understand the original, or that they ended up flanderizing the character into what they remembered them being, which I could honestly see with something like Moki, where she did express artistic sides, but now that's cranked up and that's her entire personality. And you'd think it was written primarily by fans, because you have really obscure things that are only mentioned in like one or a few episodes, like the end of the tale being called the Belubius, or the Murgles, a aquatic species of Fraggle. There are 2 separate episodes focused around both of those things, and it's nice to see that knowledge that other fans would have come back into play, but when it's surrounded by the rest of it, you don't really know how to feel. And then other things like They recycle some songs from the original series, Hip Hip Hooray, which is kind of like, you know, the Fraggles like excitement song. So that makes sense. But then others, like, oh my goodness. I love Kenan Thompson. One, he doesn't work as a doozer. And two, they gave his character Ball of Fire, which it's one of my favorite songs in the series, if you can even really call it a full-fledged song. It's less than 2 minutes long. In that episode, Kenan Thompson plays Jack Hammer, a doozer that is a con man, basically the doozer equivalent of Convincing John. And he recruits Wembley to try and get all the Fraggles to enjoy the new doozer sticks that are made with ingredients that they don't like to eat. And so as motivation, he starts singing Ball of Fire, which is like an inspirational, you can do whatever you set your mind to kind of song. And that complicates the feel and message of the song, because in this, it's a con man trying to work Wembley up, versus in the original, where it's supposed to be the inspirational feel-good song that it is. The original episode, Junior faces the music. Junior is worried that he's not going to be able to play the Royal Gorg flute, which if he can't, then he gets banished. But Cantus the Minstrel knows that, hey, no other Gorgs in the past few generations have actually tried to play it, so you're not going to know if you can do it until you try. So you got to set your mind to it and just believe in yourself. And that's what Ball of Fire is all about. I'm fine with them recycling songs, but when it completely changes the tone and message of it, especially really good ones that are performed by Jim Henson, you're kind of walking a very fine line there. And on the topic of recycling songs, can we talk about what a joke music journalism can be? Like, people knock on gaming journalism all the time, but music journalists don't care. They think that they can just write their opinion on whatever, or do a little write-up on a song and think that what they put down is correct. I have seen countless articles from like Rolling Stone and Spin and a bunch of other places that credit Dave Grohl for writing Fraggle Rock Rock. It's a song literally from the second episode of the series. How hard is it to go back and search for the original song? Like, I'm not knocking Dave Grohl, because the Foo Fighters have a cover of Fraggle Rock Rock in, it's like episode 5 or 6 or something like that, and Uncle Traveling Matt is there. It's cool, but you can't credit Dave Grohl for writing something that he didn't actually write. I think it was the Rolling Stones article where they were like, oh, well, there's a bunch of nonsensical lyrics that are very reminiscent of Fraggle Rock. And it's like, yeah, because the lyrics in the song are talking about a very specific scenario in which they're stuck in episode 2. Like, it wasn't just some wacky thing that Dave Grohl wrote down. It was a song that had context in another episode. But that's just me. Another thing that Back to the Rock does that I can't recall the original doing is having guest voices come on. Some of them work okay, like Daveed Diggs. He just sounds like a Fraggle, so that works fine, especially when he's singing. And Ed Helms, I didn't even know his character was voiced by him until I saw the credits. It just felt like another regular Fraggle actor. But then others, like Kenan Thompson, stand out as just, you know, they shoved the voice in there because they wanted that person's voice in there, which is fine sometimes. But there's the issue with, you can't just automatically turn a regular actor into a voice or puppet actor, because there are different nuances there with your voice that have to be done in order to properly convey it. Especially with Jack Hammer, Kenan Thompson's character, because it's a doozer, and the doozers are even less expressive a lot of the time than The Fraggles are, just because they're so small and limited in their puppeteering. I know it's probably weird to see a 24-year-old man sitting here talking about a children's show, but it's something that a lot of people grew up with, that a lot of people care about, and Fraggle Rock is frankly one of those shows that anybody can enjoy, honestly, just like a lot of other Muppet stuff. It's something that's refreshing. I don't want to say it's, subversive and all that stuff, but it's nice to have something familiar. It's comforting in a way to see something that you enjoyed being brought back in a way that it feels like it came back, rather than it went away and this new version is here now. Thanks so much for watching this. This is a weird new format that I'm trying out just to get, smaller, less editing work videos done in between, bigger TheArcWielder videos and prime times and things like that. I'm not gonna make this, a frequently recurring thing. It'll usually be hey, if a new show comes out or a game or whatever that I enjoy or very heavily dislike, then I might sit down and talk about it for a little bit. But yeah, if you liked this format, then please let me know. I don't like seeing myself on camera very often, but for something like this, it's quicker and easier to do, so I hope it works. So it'll let me know whether I should keep going in this direction while I work on other things or not. Thanks. See you later. You could be a coward. You could be a king. You could be the kind of kid that teaches us to sing. You could be whatever your little heart desires. You could be a walking, talking, breathing ball of fire. I could be a walking, talking, breathing ball of fire.